Do you think, and I guess this is somewhat of a loaded question because it assumes a bunch of things, but do you think if someone comes into your house at night, you should shoot them?
I think that's a personal decision that carries a ton of personal consequences with it that that individual has to deal with, right? Are you, you know, based off the state you're in, right? If you can articulate, hey, I was in fear of my life for this reason, right? Castle doctrine, yes, you are legally authorized, sometimes obligated to defend your house and your family, right? Now, when you make those decisions, I think a lot of people don't understand what comes with that,
Okay.
right? In terms of, you know, you're going to have to, the decisions you make, right? They can have, just because you're legally, yep, this is all okay, right? You potentially could be in a six-figure civil settlement that will bankrupt you trying to prove that what you did was right? Because I think it's different. You can legally not be charged with homicide, but you can still be, you know, blindsided by civil suits because of the person that you killed and the family that wants, kind of, they want money, they want a payout, they want justice in their view, and they view that as a civil suit. Right? I'm not saying that that should influence your decision. It definitely probably wouldn't for mine, you know. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's as cut and dry. There's kind of a social media lifestyle thing that sort of glorifies that, like killing someone in your house, right? And I think with that, it's not such an easy, simple conversation where, oh yeah, I would just do that, right? You just don't kind of say that off color.
Yeah.
You
That's,
know what I mean? That's something that I almost think you talk about that amongst close friends. You talk about it with your kind of trusted confidants and people you train with, and kind of hypothetically, how would that look? How do you go about it? And then you make sure that you have a very clear understanding about the state you live in and the legal thresholds and the legal liabilities and all of the concealed carry laws. And you internalize that stuff and study it so that if that situation ever does arise, you are not trying to run through that entire thought process while you're also trying to make a life and death decision, in a fraction of a second.
so have a plan and have thought through that thing.
100%.
Understand that it is um, oftentimes more complex.
I think every time you put that gun into your waistband and you go out in town, it's way more complex than what people think it is or that they give it credit to, right? Because it has become
Like the decision to use it.
just the decision to use it. When, if, when they should, if they should. And then it kind of gets built up into this thing where, you see a lot of guys that are, well, I have this gun and then I have my truck rifle. And I'm always interested in, like, at what point does defending yourself turn into a felony when you run back and go get a rifle in your truck? Because what I see on the law enforcement side, even if you're doing everything in good faith and you're trying to eliminate the threat, right, and trying to save lives, when the police arrive, there's two active shooters. One of them's good, one of them's not good. They can't tell the difference. You know what I mean? So those are all decisions that I think have now, because of like people wanting to be entertained by content, that a lot of those decisions that they 100% support the Second Amendment, but I think it turns into a very low level amount of critical thought process into what that situation actually looks like.
Yeah, there's a lot of bravado
There is.
involved in that. What do you think is the driver of that?
I mean, I think it's social media, right? It's everybody's, quest for dopamine and wanting to be entertained, right? It's why, like, a drama filled video or a call out gets, you know, a million views, but a good piece of training information gets 25,000. Right? Most people aren't interested in training. They're interested in entertainment. Right? I think that's probably how a lot of other people see it and they just don't talk about it because their business is built around
Yep.
entertaining people,
Yep.
right? It's how they monetize.
So slightly switching topics. So it seems like the fitness world is able to capitalize on that more. Like that, for whatever reason, there are fitness either influencers or fitness companies that are selling fitness type things, and they are able to get a broader audience, um, and maybe figure out how to get that dopamine hit for those folks. Um, and it seems more difficult to do that on the firearm, like the more mature, professionally minded firearms training side of things. What do you think are the differences there, and why do you think that? Why one group can do it and it's harder over here?
I don't know, I'm not in the fitness world, but from guys I've talked to, officers that kind of go on both sides like that, the fitness world and Instagram and the other world, they say there's the same ego based, right? And it's all kind of like snake oil type nonsense in the fitness world, which the vast majority of it is, right? Most of the guys, like if you remember uh, Rich Piana, right? Like he did not get the way that he got by the supplements that he sells. And I think he was very open with that for a lot of people, but it's more of an entertainment thing, right? And people want to hear him talk about the gray world and kind of the dirty world of that fitness world. And I think that's how they capture a lot of that entertainment value. And then people just buy, what they want in terms of supplements. All of it's unregulated. All of it is just 90% just garbage anyway, right? Like this protein is going to do so much more for you than this one or whatever, but no one really knows where any of that shit is made or even how it's made.
Yeah, I guess is that then full circle back to some of our initial conversation with training and some people who are
Yeah, I think it.
emphasizing certain aspects of training in order to get a big following and drive.
Yeah, I think if your whole premise for training is about some shit you used to do, you're not training anymore. You're telling stories. You're doing entertainment. If you're training ideas, concepts about what you're doing today and how you're developing in the future, now you're talking about training. But a lot of guys are are referencing, well, you do this because of, and it goes to something that happened 10 years ago, right? No one gives a shit about what happened 10 years ago. What are you doing today? If you can't articulate why, in the tactics world, why this TTP makes sense because of common sense and critical thought, or you have to use a story from the past to explain the relevancy of it, you could find a story about anything that justifies any TTP anyone uses, right? The critical thought process of it hasn't changed, right? Things make sense because they make sense. Things don't make sense because they don't make sense in absence of anyone's experience, right? And most guys, when you talk about experience, it's a data set of one or two, right? We do this because this one time this thing happened. Okay, well, what about the 1,000 times it didn't happen? And that's where I think you have to focus on, you know, the critical thinking aspect of training and not what happened in years past.
So if you want to grow X-ray alpha and I want to grow Tenicor, we should start telling stories about what we did in the past,
Sure.
and then we should probably make some cool videos about some nuance of things that don't really matter and put our finger on the trigger and
I think
show how fast we
I'm going to end up cornering that market anyway with my OnlyFans footwork network.
are. How do you? So one of the big themes that you talk about is that of not telling stories and not like it's not your pedigree, it's not what you've done in the past, it's what are you doing today that is showing performance, and what are you doing today to improve your performance, and how can you share that with other people? So there's that theme, which I agree with. Um, and there's also the idea though that like some people don't have the context to be able to even have the discussion because they don't have experience, right? Either about evaluating equipment or about evaluating skills. And so, how I guess in some ways those two things are in conflict, right? Because you gotta somehow you gotta be able to have the experience to be able to say that is a waste of time and that's stupid, but then at the same time, just at the same time, the experience or your pedigree doesn't justify being able to.
But I think there's an equal amount of examples out there in the social media world where guys have experience and they have pedigrees and they're still peddling nonsense
For sure.
because
Yep.
they're because that is the gimmick that they're making money off of, right? And they have a right to do that, right? And it's good and it's beneficial for them, right? And everything that they can say, this is a positive, you have to have this because of what I did in the background. What they don't understand is I'm well within my rights and it's my responsibility to say, okay, well, that's not good for this reason, right? And because you think you know my background or you fill in the blanks, right? Then it's just, in reality, it's still just an opinion against an opinion. The difference is I'm willing to have live conversations about my opinions without telling stories, and virtually none of those guys are willing to do that. But that's how confident I am in my understanding of where I'm at currently, what it took for me to get here from a training standpoint, and lessons I've learned, and being able to talk to those lessons in the training world without telling war stories about things that may or may not have happened. Right? And I know plenty of guys that do the same thing, right? They're because they're focused on where they're at today and not where they were at 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Because at some point, you know, I used to think when I retired that the shelf life for TTPs or whatever was about 6 months. And I still think that. So, with that said, you know, kind of some principles still make sense. But in terms of like how current are you at um, at the TTPs that you promote, the currency would be virtually zero, right? And I would also challenge that. Are you even like guys that are teaching tactical courses? Are you demoing things at very high levels, right? The skills that you promote, right? And I don't know if they are or not. I've never been to their classes. I never will be. I'll never take a CQB class, right? But I would suspect that most guys are not putting a gun on and showing them what execution of the TTP looks like at a very high level. I would suspect that not many people are doing that because they're all living in the past, right? And we teach the principles, principles never change, right? Techniques evolve, but we still should be guided by doctrinal principles and what we're doing when it comes to the tactics world.
So people should be teaching the principles because those are the things that are not changing versus the.
Yeah, I don't think it has, and I think no matter how much people that if you look at CQB specifically, right, the principles for CQB have remained unchanged, right? Anything else you're talking about are procedural variations and technique.
So what are the principles that haven't changed?
Surprise, speed, and violence of action. It's never changed, right? It's the order that you leverage them. It's also the order you lose them in. But a lot of people don't understand that, right? And it does go back to like what you said. A lot of people on YouTube and on the social media side in the tactics world, you don't have the experience to teach what you teach. I see it, right? Just like you have the every right to put all that information out, I have every right to refute it, right? The only difference is I'm willing to have a live conversation 24 hours a day with any of those people for everyone that follows to watch, right? And if you are, I think too, like if you're a true subject matter expert, you can do that. You shouldn't be afraid to talk to another subject matter expert about differences of opinion, right? But very few guys are willing to. And it goes back to that ego, bravado, right? The imposter syndrome shit that they're all living under, you know. That's just my opinion.